Conjugate, carb cycling, and classic physique. Sounds like a combination for disaster, right? Turns out it was a great recipe not only for hypertrophy, but a first place trophy. Well, actually a first place medal, but, good tagline. Let me have this. So just a quick little forward. This competition took place a week ago from today, so stage photos have not been released yet, but I will be dropping them on the channel once they do. So please pardon the photos that I do have on here. They were taken using my cell phone camera, which isn't the best quality. So let's go ahead and set the stage. The athlete's name that I worked with for this competition, his name is Seth, and he came to me with a rather unusual request. He wasn't looking for strongman or power building or any sort of functional fitness sport, but classic physique. He'd talked with a few of my strength athletes, and he said that he didn't want a hype man. He wanted accountability, perspective, and a real plan. He wanted to stop succumbing to paralysis by analysis. So I told him straight when we talked, I'm not an expert when it comes to posing. I'm actually borderline useless to you. But if he was down to work, I'd give him everything I had, so we decided to trip the light fantastic, and here's what we did. First and foremost was nutrition. At 16 weeks out, I opted for carb cycling as it's an approach that I'm very comfortable with and I've had great success with in the past for both performance and fat loss metrics. This would allow us to keep his performance high, hold on to muscle, and push conditioning. The setup was pretty basic overall. You had 2 higher carb days and 5 lower carb days. The low carb days helped to drive fat loss, while the high carb days were there to help protect his muscle mass and keep him sane during prep. So here is what those days looked like in terms of setup. I have it set as grams per pound of body weight. That way, if you did want to use it for yourself, you certainly could. And if you were looking to use this for mass gain as opposed to fat loss, you would simply increase your high days to somewhere between 2 to 4 based off your own progress. And this is actually what we're going to be doing with Seth when he moves into his next bulk as well. Now, as far as when to place these days, personally, I like having the high carb days the days before the heaviest workouts of the week. So for Seth, he would have one of them the day before leg day, and then another one was done on the weekend. But we'll talk a bit more about that when we move to the split phase of this video. Now, when it did come to food selection, we kept it pretty basic. If it fits your macros is a solid structure to work backwards from. However, we had a few small caveats. In terms of the proteins, we opted for leaner proteins because fat was overall fairly restricted on this nutritional approach. And that way, too, we had the luxury of adding back in fats via something like butter or cheese if we needed it. And that would also help him add more flavor and keep the meals more enjoyable overall. Carbohydrates were often from rice, fruit, and minimally processed, simpler, higher quality breads. And then in terms of a cheat meal, we only did 1 cheat meal a week, and this was after week 2. First 2 weeks we were getting data points, and then 4 weeks out we pulled all cheat meals. The cheat meals themselves were never above 600 calories, just enough to reset the brain without wrecking the plan, so something such as a cheeseburger, maybe 1 or 2 candy bars. Now that we talked about how we fueled him, let's talk about how we trained him. Now, if you're unfamiliar with classic physique, it has a few unique judging criteria. These are just general broad strokes on what the judges are after. They want an X-type frame, wide shoulders, narrow waist, developed legs. They want full muscle without excess bulk, and a tight midsection coupled with defined, visible muscle, but you don't want to be overly dry. So based off of these criteria plus where Seth was at, I determined that we needed to emphasize his upper body a bit more overall, and this is where we decided to break into, shall we say, experimental territory. So given where Seth was in terms of his development, recognizing that his legs were ahead of his upper body, we decided that something such as a 2x lower upper might not necessarily be the best path forward. Instead, a legs push-pull split was where I was thinking initially, but then on further review, we decided to go ahead and break a few rules, and we went with a 5-day setup. Pull, push, legs, pull, push. It's a pretty classic structure, but with a strategic twist, and this is also where I dove into my little bag of tricks because I wanted to make it conjugate. Now, while conjugate is really synonymous with powerlifting, the underlying principles of conjugate are what I was thinking more on. Exercise rotation to stay ahead of overuse and accommodation, max effort training to strain to both expose and strengthen weak links, and dynamic effort training to code intent and manage fatigue. You could certainly apply all of these principles to a classic physique athlete, but there need to be adaptations, and that's what the heart of quality training is taking good frameworks and adapting them to the individual. And as a brief side note here, if you're curious about more conjugate adaptations, hit the rest of my channel. I've got a 10-part series on conjugate training where I really dive into unique adaptations and applications of the methods and underlying principles to make it work for a wide variety of populations. Now, as far as the adaptations go, it wasn't overly complicated. Exercise rotation was retained because this helps prevent overuse and little tweaks from accumulating, especially when you're prepping for a show. You're losing all of that weight, you're drying yourself out. So they tend to accumulate, the tweaks that is, a lot faster than you'd think. And if you're already tweaked, you're already suffering, you're already 1 foot in the grave 14 weeks out from competition, it makes the rest of the cut unsustainable. Now, as far as adapting the dynamic and max effort methods for a classic physique athlete, what we did here is we kept the spirit of both days in place, but then adjusted, if you will, the deeper aspects of it. For example, on dynamic effort days, we replaced these with more of a pump day, slower tempos, sets across 8 to 12 plus reps. The idea here is we were training intentionality and control of the weight, whereas the max effort days were just a heavier day where you might do a top set of 5 to 8 reps and then back offs. The idea here is it split up the intensity and volume across the week to create a more enjoyable training week. We only did this for the push and pull days. Leg day was just its own thing that combined both efforts. So how that looked in a training week is as follows. Here's what a full week of training looked like for Seth. So we started off with the pull and push max effort days. And remember, the max effort days in this training were not to 1 rep maxes, but hitting a heavy top set and then back off sets thereafter. And the idea here is this allowed us to push intensity and overload a little bit. Really fun way to start the training week, and movement selection was done so that these were, shall we say, lower stakes movements. That way, if a rep was missed or anything like that, we're not putting him at great risk. Then we had our leg day. And then we had our developmental days. Now, the developmental days are the days that replace the dynamic effort method in this training program. And what we did here is with developmental, as I had alluded to earlier, these were pump type days. We're doing higher reps, sets across, focusing a bit more on intent and control of the weight. Now, by arranging the training week in this manner, what this allowed us to do was push progression in a few different ways. On our max effort days, we could push progress by going heavier. Whereas on the pump developmental days, we could push progress by adding more reps per set or just increasing the overall density of the work within the session. This gave us multiple ways to improve week in, week out, keep the training exciting, keep him compliant, while still moving him towards his goals. And then remember, every 3 to 4 weeks, we rotated out most of the exercises, changed out the progression methods to help stay ahead of accommodation and overuse, as well as keep things fun and enjoyable. So really quick here, these are just some of the progressions that we used and a brief explanation of how to go out running them. Give this a quick screenshot, that way you can use it for future reference if you decide you feel like running Seth's split. So, at day's end, how did it go? It went really freaking well. Seth took home first place in his field with a final judge tally of 2-2-1-1-1-1, so a final score of 6. For reference, second place finished with 9 points, third and fourth were scored 15 and 20 respectively. First show, first place. Seth gave us 100% effort on this program, and we extracted a version of him that we're both really proud of, needless to say. Again, I wish I had stage photos for this video, but I will drop them on the channel when they come out. But hey, hats off to Seth, great job. And just one final note here. So remember, this was Seth's first competition. So to the person who told him the Sunday leading into the show that he looked like he was 8 weeks out and that his training and nutrition were all wrong, L ratio, kiss our ass.